the numbers, harnessing data for sustainable development. This webinar seminar series is jointly hosted by Paris 21, Open Data Watch, and Cepei. My name is Johannes Jütting. I'm the head of the Paris 21 Secretariat here in Paris, and I'm very excited to be the moderator of this first webinar. We have picked, I think, a quite interesting topic for our first webinar, and we've asked it, we put it into a question: is investing in capacity development a waste of money? What we will be doing over the next hour is, with our distinguished panelists, to have an exchange about the topic in the first part, and then we will open up for you, for the listeners, for you, for the audience, to ask us questions that you would like to put forward to the panelists. Peter, do you want to say just a few things about how our distinguished audience can engage with us, the panelists here?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Well, welcome to this first webinar, as Johannes has mentioned, in the series of 5 webinars, which will happen over the coming months. As you can see from the GoToWebinar window on your screen, you have the option to ask questions. So there's a question box. So feel free throughout the next 30 or 40 minutes to put your questions as they come to your mind, and then at the end, we'll be asking a select number of these questions depending on time to the panelists. So feel free, even starting now, to start putting in your questions. This webinar is being recorded and we'll be uploading it to our websites afterwards. So if you were to happen to be disconnected, don't worry, you will still be able to watch the rest of it at a later point in time. And then lastly, we also have a Gmail address for the entire webinar series, which is on the website. But for now, I'll just mention it's beyondthenumberswebinar@gmail.com. So if there are any questions you have on this specific webinar, you want to reach out to us, or if you want to have questions about some of the future webinar topics, feel free to send us an email at that Gmail request. So we look forward to staying engaged with you after this event. So thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Peter. Coming to the topic of today for capacity development, and I think it's fair to say that this topic, capacity development, seems to be everybody's darling. You can pick any kind of study, report, plan, and you will find in some shape or form some reference made to we need to strengthen capacity. We need to strengthen capacity of data producers. We need to strengthen capacity of data users. We need to strengthen capacities of national statistical systems. And I think it's fair to say that this is certainly possibly a very good thing. But if we step back for a second, do we really understand, do we have a common understanding what capacity development actually means? Do we know how it is done properly? Can we possibly do it better? These are the questions that often are not addressed in any conference or any paper. Often the last PowerPoint slide is, we need to do this, but we often don't know really how to do it. So I was looking up a commonly defined definition for capacity development, and I will just read it out what a reference definition of capacity development is. Capacity development is defined as the process through which individuals, organizations, and societies obtain, strengthen, and maintain the capabilities to set and achieve their own development objectives over time. So this is quite a mouthful, right? It's difficult to grasp what it really means. So I was looking for a Chinese proverb. It's always good to look for Chinese proverb because the Chinese have often a very nice way of saying things in a quite simple way. The Chinese proverb, and I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about it, it's very simple. It just says, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. To some extent, this seems to be an essence of what we want to achieve with capacity development. Unfortunately, the Chinese proverb doesn't tell you exactly what does fishing exactly mean. Is fishing, I mean, catching the fish, is it good enough to feed people over the time? So according to some research, the aid industry, the development aid industry, is spending $15 billion per year on capacity development, a significant amount of order. And we are just not sure if those $15 billion are really delivering the results we would like to see. In our area, data and statistics, I think it's fair enough to say that we have many more data and statistics available, but I think we can also all fairly say that lots of important data gaps are still there. And in particular, we have big issues in terms of the timely production of data, and we have big issues concerning data disaggregation. So what has investing in capacity in data and statistics actually brought about? There's one really frightening number that the World Bank put out recently. In more than 110 countries, we are not observing, do not have well-functioning existing civil registration and vital statistics systems. What does that mean? It means that we don't know exactly of how many people in a country live at a certain point in time. We don't know how many babies are born. We don't know if it's boys or girls. And those people who have been born, they do not have necessarily a legal identity. So can we conclude that money has been wasted in capacity development? And what about the changing environment too? We are living in a very different environment than just a couple of decades ago. What kind of capacities do we need in data and statistics to deal with, let's say, the data ecosystem? Let's say with erosion of trust in official statistics. Let's say with new data sources. Let's say overall, what kind of capacities do we need in a 4.0 world? So I'm very excited to have three distinguished panelists with me, which I will now introduce one by one. The first panelist is sitting in Washington. It's Shaida Badi. She's the co-founder and managing director of Open Data Watch, an NGO focused on monitoring and promoting open data in national statistical offices. Shaida brings several decades of experiences in managing global development statistics as a long-time director of the World Bank's Development Data Group. Shaida, very welcome to this webinar.
Thank you.
Barbara sits next to me. Barbara Paredes is a junior policy analyst at the Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century, short called Paris 21. And over the past 2 years, Barbara has been working very closely on developing a new framework on capacity development in data and statistics. She's currently working on some guidelines, and we are very happy to have Barbara with us. Hello, Barbara.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, we have Lisa Dene. She is a freelance consultant currently based in Ottawa. She works with the Overseas Development Institute in London, where she works on issues related to governance, fragile states, capacity development, security, and justice. Lisa was the lead author of the synthesis report on strengthening state capacity by the Secure Livelihood Research Consortium. Lisa has worked very closely with DFID and the Australian Aid Agency in synthesizing evidence and drafting guidance on capacity development. Lisa is also a person who put out a very interesting blog about capacity development some time ago, which we came across and which to some extent spearheaded this work. So Lisa, a warm welcome to this webinar.
Nice to be with you.
So Shaida, let's get you into the picture. You have been working over a few decades on strengthening capacity in data and statistics in your role as a managing director at the World Bank. If you look back, what has been one of the main successes you have seen in strengthening capacities, and what made that success happen?
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you for organizing this webinar. It's really a pleasure to be here. And indeed, capacity development is certainly my darling. So I like that expression. Well, in answering your question, first I wanted to say that I have seen many successes. So picking one is very difficult. And the ones that I have seen that I really admire are the ones that have been lowering aid dependency, becoming independent legally and technically, and NSO leaders have become really leaders of the field and connecting the National Statistical Office to the national plans. So I've seen many of those cases, like Mexico, like Philippines, like many countries around the world. So I'm certainly positive and very excited to see the capacity development being discussed and going further. But one example, which for the past 8-9 years that I've been watching and somewhat involved in earlier on, which I wanted to bring out, is the case of Rwanda. And this is a country in sub-Saharan Africa, which, as you can imagine, it could face a lot of issues with the development of capacity for statistics. But it has done quite well in that duration through a series of national planning, and their national plan, which is called NSDS, has been very well connected to actually the country's plan, which is a very good feature that we want to maintain. And the country has really owned this national plan. And we can see it at the signal of the national ownership of the plan is that there is more domestic resources that have been allocated to national plan for the statistics. It has a very strong NSO leadership, and it has continued to bring and make a case for bringing the donors and all the partners together. And during that duration of development, it has had 2 series of discussions with donors and attracting resources from the donors. And in fact, the one that I know best brought 7 donors from World Bank, from DFID, from UNDP, from European Commission, from African Development Bank. They all came together and pooled their resources around the national statistical strategy to help the country. So those are great features that we can see. They've had some difficulty, of course. No national planning for statistics goes smoothly. Sometimes there are implementation delays, and not always, by the way, implementation delays are caused by the country. Sometimes the delay is, in fact, could be in the interface and interactions between the donor and the country. But overall, this has been what I call a success story. And today, if you look at the result, and it's very important to keep an eye on the result, and I think Rwanda's case has been keeping an eye on the result, you will see that the statistical capacity indicator has really improved. You know, when we started in 2010, I was just looking that up, it was 67.8. And now the latest one for 2017 is 77.8, which is above the Sub-Saharan Africa score and also above the IDA score. So it's a very good progress. But I also looking at this sort of from the user perspective, they have done a good job with the open data and making the data accessible. So the ODIN score, the open data inventory score, is very good now. It's one of the highest, I think is the highest in the Sub-Saharan Africa of 54. So, and I know from another study that their usage of data has increased. So these are all positive signs that we see that investment in capacity and leadership of the National Statistical Office for linking the statistical plan to the national strategies and national priorities, it all pays off. And of course, developing the skills and all that is needed behind it. So the big lesson from Rwanda is really leadership, national ownership, and also long-term commitment to statistical capacity building. We often forget that statistical capacity building is not a low-hanging fruit that you can enjoy in 1 month or 2 months. You can actually be very clever and plan your long-term plan to also gain short-term, but it's really long-term, long-haul investment in building infrastructure and statistical capacity. So I hope that's a sufficient answer to your complicated question. Thank you.
Well, it certainly is, and thank you for providing us with a very concrete example. Can I just maybe ask one follow-up question? You mentioned leadership as a very critical, decisive argument or factor that helped Rwanda to play very successfully this role, also managing donors. By any chance, do you know, I mean, this leadership, are you talking basically about the leadership of the National Statistical Institute, or would you say there was an overarching commitment also from the planning, financing, maybe even prime minister in supporting data and statistics. Do you have by any chance information how in Rwanda the leadership was sort of helping in a way that you just so nicely described to us?
I think the important thing for our discussion is the strong NSO leadership. And that leadership actually compelled the donors to pool their resources together in support of NSCS. And that leadership also compelled to buy the political buy-in from the government and linking to other parts of the government needed to also mobilize domestic resources. So it's really the leadership of the NSO that is critical. But as you said, I think it's very important, and it's really creates a very important and strong enabling environment if that leadership is also in existence in other ministries and other parts of the government. And, of course, we see that in all our organizations as well. If you have several leaders who are actually come together, you get much stronger outcome. So that is very much desired. But what is really required is the leadership from the NSO side.
Okay, thank you so much, Shaida. Well, Barbara, let me now turn to you. So we just heard a very positive example, capacity development, and Shaida mentioned from her long-standing career, she can sort of quote quite a few things. On the other hand, we just also heard that there may be also some negative examples, and I think the whole idea is also to bring out the negative examples to learn from it. And in the context of the Paris 21 project, you have been working on this topic now for quite some time. You have been reviewing various projects, conducting expert interviews with the partners of Paris 21. We have run a survey. From all this material, can you give us an example where maybe capacity efforts have failed, and why so?
Yes, thank you very much. So actually the two examples that I'm going to bring are publicly available. So therefore I will freely put the names of the donors and the recipient countries if they were able, which is also good. I think this is something important. We're able to reflect on this and see why this failed. The first example is from Ghana and the World Bank. It was from a multi-donor trust fund. The approval of this grant was in 2010, 31st of December. So they were very motivated to approve this plan, working 31st of December, with a length of 3 years. And the total project was of $5.9 billion, out of which $380 million were spent on a statistical law reform. However, in 2016, the evaluation of this project found out that the law was not passed. What happened? Why did they invest so much? And actually, they spent double the funds to pass this law, and this did not happen. What happened there? It was the difference between the package of reforms that the World Bank wanted to pass with the government of Ghana. They did not agree on what they wanted to pass, and therefore the law did not pass. And this shows how top-down approaches do not necessarily work. It's not just putting resources that will get consensus built. And the second example, which is also publicly available, is from Eritrea and Statistics Norway. They had a bilateral cooperation, a twinning arrangement, it's called. They were focusing on economic statistics. The context of the country, this was in 2004, was very difficult political situation. They had border issues with Ethiopia that were not resolved, and also macroeconomic imbalances. So the political situation was and the economic situation was hard in the country. And what happened was that despite the fact that they provided a lot of support to their IT systems, they were able to compile consumer price indexes for all the country very efficiently. When they were to publish this data to the major public, to the larger audiences, they found out that the government only wanted to use them themselves for their policies. And their conclusion was that, so the government did actually improve their use of statistics, so they improved the decision making, but this was not this was not able to, they were not allowed to publish them. And I think that the main issue here was the lack of assessment of the local political environment, the complicated situation that the country was going through. And therefore, this in 2011, Statistics Norway withdrew the support from Eritrea, and they, in their own cooperation guidelines, they actually say that this was a failure. And the budget for this project was $1.45 million. So we can see also that not necessarily the amount of resources are a predictor of success, that not always investing in infrastructure brings results. And I think those two are good examples, also good examples of the donors themselves and the countries reflecting on these failures.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for these very compelling stories. And so we have now had 3 examples. We heard about Rwanda, Ghana, Eritrea. And let me now bring in Lisa. I mean, Lisa, you have been working for this for quite some time. And Lisa is a truly development expert, and we are more on the side of data and statistics. And I think it's always good from a data and statistics side to look beyond our sector. I think the examples that we just have chosen were, or have learned about, were coming from the data and statistics sector. I think in terms of, we saw this mixed picture of success and failure. And as a sort of general question to you, as somebody who has looked at from a more generic perspective, and coming back to the key question of the seminar and starting with a more general question, has money been wasted in capacity development efforts, and how can we go about to stop wasting the money?
Well, just a small question to start with. Well, look, I think the first thing to say is that capacity constraints are certainly real. And so it makes sense that we invest heavily in capacity development. And we do. As you were saying at the beginning, you know, it's been estimated that about 1/4 of all international development assistance is spent on capacity development in some way. So given that level of spending, we need to be ensuring that what we do in capacity development is really connected with what we know about the complex nature of capacity, and the fact that it's not something that's just possessed or not by an individual, but is something that's also supported by organizations and wider political systems, or can also be undermined by those things. So I also think we need to diversify what we do in our capacity development efforts, which are remarkably similar across sectors. So to give some examples from outside of data and statistics, so training, for instance, is used widely to improve teaching capacity, the capacity of mothers to feed their children nutritious diets, to farmers to grow more diversified crops. We've got technical experts or technical assistants deployed to build capacity across all kinds of government ministries, from reforming public financial management to drafting new legislation to setting up anti-corruption commissions. And then we also do a lot of provision of resources and equipment and infrastructure, building things. So we build or equip schools, hospitals, courts, and so on. So for an activity that takes up so much of development resources, there's actually not that much innovation or diversity in our models of support. We tend to do the same things repeatedly across contexts and sectors. And I think there's probably not enough learning that goes on across some of those sectors to pick up on lessons about some of those ways of working. Now, the second thing I think to say is that even though those capacity constraints are real, they're also rarely the binding constraint. So our approaches seem to suggest that if only there was a school building or more books or better trained teachers, then everything would be fine. But we know that there are actually political reasons or blockages that are what sort of determines dysfunction and what makes dysfunction occur. So, for instance, in relation to child malnutrition, it's not just that mothers don't have an adequate understanding of what constitutes a nutritious diet. It's also the fact that their relative power in the household means that they're not able to enforce decisions about that. Or, drug stockouts, for instance, in the health sector. They don't happen merely because of an inadequate drug supply. They happen because health workers, for instance, aren't paid on time, and so they are incentivized to sell drugs on the black market to supplement their incomes and so on. So these are issues of power and incentives and politics that capacity development alone isn't able to address. And so for data and statistics, I think there's a question about the political reasons that countries might not invest in or use statistics and data, and what can we do about some of those political constraints, which are often, I think, some of the real sticking points that capacity development doesn't necessarily touch upon as effectively.
Thanks, Lisa. Can I just ask a follow-up question? So if I understand correctly, you mentioned the issue of power and the political economy in countries and incentives, and I think we can all sort of agree with this. Now, we have many countries where those situations are not necessarily all in line or aligned to sort of standards that we maybe want to see. So, put it bluntly, shall we stop capacity development in corrupt states? What do we do in states that we are, just take the Transparency International index of corruption? We can just go, and there are certain countries which are topping these scorings. And what do we do in those countries? Shall we stop it, or what would you suggest?
So, I mean, this is tricky. I think very often when development interventions don't work, we blame it on the lack of political will on the part of the partner government. So, for instance, in Barbara's example in Ghana, the fact that the World Bank project didn't work, they might have said, and I haven't read the report, so I don't know if they did, but it didn't happen because of a lack of political will on the part of government. But perhaps what's also true in those cases is that we've failed to take the politics into account properly in our programming. So if there's not political will to support the changes that you're trying to make, then perhaps you're supporting the wrong changes. So it's not necessarily an either or, that we do capacity development or we don't in these contexts, but it's about tailoring our capacity development efforts to the political context and taking advantage of the particular entry points that arise. Now, there will be more and less space in different contexts to work. That's certainly true. And what we do, I guess, in more corrupt states will necessarily, I think, look different perhaps from what we do in less corrupt states. But I do think that we can still engage, taking a more incremental approach, building relationships, waiting for moments of opportunity and so on, but also being realistic about what the political context will allow.
Mm-hmm. Let me turn again to Barbara. I mean, so we since 20 minutes, we started to really dive deeper into the topic of capacity development. I think you have already some interesting takeaways. Stepping back a second and think again about the definition. I mean, with many things in development, from poverty to informal employment, there's always very different definitions. And I think even the term of capacity development lends itself to various different interpretations, even interpretations over time. So as you have been working on this very recently, Barbara, can you tell us a little bit more, what do we actually mean by capacity development? Can you say has our thinking maybe changed, or should it change?
Well, thank you. That question is actually very good in terms of what you said at the beginning, that capacity development is a process. So Lisa said nobody owns capacity. It's just a process that we develop. And it can begin, but it's not a linear process, so you can also go back. I come from Argentina, so we can say, for example, the case of the National Statistical Office of Argentina is a good example of how you can actually sometimes go backwards in capacity, then you can go forwards, right? So we say that it's a process, and then we also say that it's for countries to achieve their own development objectives. So when we say, for example, that we are supporting change, but it's not what the country necessarily wants, then we have to be a bit more open to understand what is needed in the country by the actors that are in the country. That does not mean that we do not have to have any moral objective or moral stance, but we have to be able to be a bit more relativistic. So for this reason, we can say that there are two types of challenges. So one type of challenges are the logistical challenges, which involve doing things that we already know how to do, and there are not so many risks in doing them because we already know how to do them, and there's probably agreement on how to do this. But there are some complex challenges that we do not know what to do. There are many diverging interests in the country, for example, to implement those changes. And the context might be uncertain. We don't have enough information. We do not know. And so these two types of challenges are both part of. So I have one example from Europe, actually. So I recently read a book about some academics from the Royal Spanish Academy back in the time of a bit prior to the French Revolution that wanted to bring the first encyclopedia to Spain. Spain was a very Catholic country, was against science, And these academics had to go through a very risky trip to get this encyclopedia from Paris to Spain. They had a lot of people who were sabotaging their trip. In the book, they even described they were robbed in the way. They had lost a lot of their money. They had to actually ask help from the authorities of the country, and they didn't help them. And the reason why was many people in Spain thought that the encyclopedia, that science corrupted minds. That was against Catholicism. How would we read science? And this is actually related to statistics in some way, because we want to say statistics will actually help us get rid of some prejudices that we have, but it's not so easy to do this. Therefore, if we actually took the people from 2018 Royal Spanish Academy and they would have told them, why didn't you buy this book in Amazon? Wouldn't have been easier? I mean, why didn't you take a GPS with you in the cart instead of going through the dangerous zones? I think that would not work, would it? So sometimes we're thinking that it's something easy because we are forgetting that also developed countries, what we call developed countries, have also gone through this process of building these agreements. So I think that it's not a given. So it's important that we reflect on this when we go to any other country.
This brings me directly back. This is a very interesting example, and I think that's certainly very true that capacity development, it's often, as we say, it's about people, it's about capacity development of Barbara, Scheider, Johannes, it's about organizations of, let's say, Open Data Watch, Paris 21 and ODI, and it's about the institutional environment. But Scheider, let me bring you in again. I mean, I think we talked about in particular about how can outsiders help countries to develop capacities. And you have been in one of the main institutions responsible for capacity development, data and statistics for a very long time. And you have seen that donors come often with very good intentions. But there's a very interesting book written by a Latin American professor saying good intentions, bad outcomes. So the questions about I think that, I mean, we are all altruistically motivated for some time, for some donors. The question is then about the coordination of donors. Donors have also own interests. They come with a certain, idea. Let's say a certain donor wants to promote gender statistics, or it wants to promote employment, informal employment, or national accounts. And how can we ensure better donor coordination? How can we avoid that a national statistical office head or senior management in developing countries is not only maintaining donor relationships and be busy with this, but really does his work, what he should do, and not get dragged away by telling stories that come from donors? Scheider, do you have some thoughts about this?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Johannes. First of all, it's important to remind ourselves why we need coordination. You know, what's in it for everybody. And there are a number of stories there of how coordination can help with duplication, how it can kind of take care of synergies so that we don't miss opportunities, how it can add value, and overall how it can build partnership and build capacity in countries and also in donor agencies. So I think we haven't done enough of showing coordination actually has value in it, and it brings some value. That's one thought that I just want to leave you with. The other is that in terms of coordination, there is a lot of mechanism for coordination for statistics at national and international level. You know, everybody knows that we have fundamental principle, we have legal acts, we have code of practice. There is many countries who actually follow GDDS, the IMF's standards for data dissemination and data management. We have peer review systems. So there are lots of mechanisms for countries to actually coordinate and harmonize and align their data. On the donor side, in fact, there are also some standards. You know, many of you probably know of for example, the Paris Declaration, the Accra Agenda, which actually has donors sign up to a number of principles like alignment, ownership, harmonization, mutual accountability, and going for even slogans like aid works when we all work together. So as you said, if we have all these standards, if we have very reasonable, smart people, why doesn't it work? Why do we have still, we're talking about coordination issues? I think in many ways, coordination, maybe we've been looking at it in a wrong way. Maybe we've been looking at it as a much more heavy-handed way of solving the problem. Maybe coordination should be broken down into pieces and done in a sort of a much more pragmatic way. And two points I wanted to mention. One is that for me, I've seen when coordination works is in case of Rwanda or case of other countries that I've seen, is where it happens at the country level, where the donors and everybody comes together and kind of sign up to a common plan of action. So if we could bring coordination more to the country level, or if not at the sector level, I think that's much more pragmatic of saying in general, everybody in every field of data should be, for every country or region should coordinate. The other point that I want to leave you with is maybe we do need some more light touch kind of approach for coordination, and raising it with donors, maybe knowledge management system, maybe more of monitoring some of the coordination issues and trying to understand it more, maybe have much more evaluation and peer review spirit to also coordination, but in a light touch way, because at the end of the day, all those people who have lived as long as I have in this field know and really understand it, that everybody is agreeing with coordination, but nobody wants to be coordinated. So how do we bring everybody together and make sure that the value comes out? I think it should be at the country level or sector level, and we should have some more mechanisms of a light touch approach for coordination. I hope that adds something to your question.
Well, that adds a lot. Can I just, in terms of a follow-up thought, well, I think you mentioned in the beginning, in one of your first intervention, the Rwanda example was very telling, was about the National Development Plan, generally speaking, and the National Statistical Plan, the NSDSs, and that the donors should align with the NSDS. And I believe that Rwanda is a country case where Rwanda also said no to a donor. And I think we had at the World Data Forum, we had a session on how to say no to donors. Quite interesting. Are you, I mean, in terms of carrot and sticks to donors for doing better in coordination and using country mechanisms, would you, I mean, be able to think of one or two in terms of a carrot for a donor or a stick, how one could make them more use country frameworks? Because as you know, the current trend in development aid is more for pushing out its own interests. So do you have one or two ideas about how coordination at country level, how can we make it attractive for donors to align to national plans?
Well, it is, one idea is that any national plan should be very responsive and understand what the needs of its clients are, including, of course, the most important is the national needs, but the international needs would be also very important. So if we could help the countries, by themselves, or maybe with help from Paris 21 or others, to have a little bit more broader understanding what are the international needs from the countries, that could actually bring the demand and supply of data closer together. So in many ways, we know that, for example, the donors have a wish list. They have, on their item, they want to improve women's work and employment, or they want to reduce poverty, or they have specific goals in mind that they want to achieve. At the end of the day, if you translate that to data and supply of data, that could really bridge the supply and demand between the country and donor. So that's one way of doing that. The other very simple way, Johannes, which I have seen work in my years of experience, is very simple way of bringing people around the table to discuss. I have been in what I call NSDS discussions with donors, and I have seen that when donors enter a dialogue with the country of why a country wants to, let's say, have this survey instead of that survey first, or why they want this data to be published first before that data, and they want to sort of sequence their activities. It really works, that kind of work. So second idea is just have a dialogue and get people around the table to discuss.
Well, thank you so much. I will come back with one question for Barbara and Lisa, and then we will. I will give the floor back to Peter so that he can sort of read out a few questions to you from our audience. So Peter, I mean, let's just get two more questions, quick questions or quick answers for the question. Barbara, we talked about the changing definition of capacity development, and I believe Paris 21 coined the term capacity development 4.0. So many people are confused. Why 4.0? What does it mean, capacity development 4.0? And can you give us a concrete example how 4.0 might be sort of helping us with some of the things that we just talked about?
Sure, thank you for that. Well, C 4.0 is actually just saying that we need a change. We should stop thinking about everything as these logistical challenges, as we were talking before, saying that the countries should apply, responses that have worked elsewhere and focus on local solutions, focus on what works in the countries. As Lisa mentioned before, also what Shaira said about the national development plans and how we can actually work for the countries. And I was thinking that it would be easier to use an example from an institution that is currently doing something similar of this. So there is this example of it started in 2017, the inception of this program between Albania and the Swiss Federal Statistical Office. It's also a bilateral cooperation, and it's to have strong local statistics, but this is within a larger program, which is something that we did not mention yet, although we did talk about alignment of the National Statistical Plan with the National Development Plan, is that statistics are part of governance. So isolated statistical programs might not necessarily work because we are forgetting about the users. We are forgetting about how these are used for improving the governance of a country. So this program, what they started doing in July 2017 until June 2018, so 1 year of inception. That means 1 year of consulting stakeholders at the municipal level, users and providers of data. Providers are generally, for example, the vital registration. So anyone who holds an administrative data set and could be used for statistics. And what they did was ask them and the national authorities, what type of statistics do you need and how? And then after this whole year of consultations, they realized that they could not maybe bring one single solution to all the municipalities of Albania. And we're talking about a single country here. So in this program, they said, well, we might have to acknowledge the fact that maybe not all municipalities want the same statistics at the same time. So we have to have solutions that are adaptable for each of the municipalities and then work up from there. So we start from the base. We have a lot of user consultation. We also think about the larger governance of these municipalities and then of the country in the future. And not only did they focus on these producing statistics, but part of the plan was already how do we integrate these statistics in policy making? So not only just consulting the users on what statistics do they need, but also thinking about how they will be used in the future. And so we here see that there's also locally relevant solutions and the thought of the larger governance, which is the main function of statistics, which is sometimes forget.
Very good. Lisa, you take a broader view about capacity development. We heard just so how a donor may have changed. We heard about the Swiss approach. And so the question is a little bit, do you see donors changing towards this new environment? Do we have concrete examples that donors are adapting and changing their approach reflecting on the importance of soft skills, for instance, and not only hardcore skills, technical skills, or building infrastructure. Do you have maybe even an example of how a donor changed?
Yeah, so I think there's been a push in a number of donor programs in the governance sector in particular to value soft skills. And certainly I've seen this in DFID programs run by the UK and DFAT in Australia, for instance. Sort of trying to embed the idea that good technical assistance is not just about a technical expert, but it's also someone with good communication skills, cultural awareness, local knowledge, someone who could sort of work behind the scenes in a supportive way. And so I think increasingly that's built into the terms of reference, for instance, for technical assistance in a lot of DFID and DFAT programs. But one of the challenges, I think, is that the donor assessment criteria for many roles still sort of end up emphasizing technical knowledge over some of these other forms of experience. So I think perhaps we still have a little a way to go there. And I think in terms of some of the other modalities, you know, there's a good number of examples of training in relation to gender in particular that have tried to integrate more sort of experiential, transformative learning techniques that we know are better suited to adult learning. These are sort of approaches that don't just try and focus on cognitive learning and transferring knowledge, but try and engage with attitudes and beliefs and things like that. So there are certainly efforts in a number of sectors by a couple of donors to try and integrate this sort of thing. But I think there's still some way to go for that to become the norm.
So good. So we can conclude, I mean, from this first round of conversation. So lots of things are happening. We can see some change also in donor behavior, but we also see some change in terms of the methods and methodologies that we have available. There are some good examples, but there's still some bad examples. So maybe that's now the time to give the floor to Peter to come in and read out maybe a few questions and to the panelists that may have come up. Peter, we can't hear you. Can you?
Hello?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah. Okay. Hear you. Yeah.
So I'm happy to come in with a few of the questions that we've collected. We have quite a few, so I don't know if we're going to be able to get around to all of them during this webinar, but as I said earlier, we're happy to maybe take this conversation offline afterwards. But let me start with a few of these ones that we got, and I think they're quite interesting subjects that we haven't quite discussed yet. One is from George Nufak-Sage. People capacitated tend to move to international organizations, and so it might not look like the impact is significant. And I think this is interesting because it touches on some of the issues that I think we see in the development community quite a lot of brain drain, and how all of these activities in terms of capacity development, assuming that they work well, will empower and provide the skills to some of the best performers. And then what happens after that? They end up leaving for positions at multilateral institutions or with private companies. And so there's this loss of knowledge and loss of this momentum that has been built up. So if anyone has any ideas on how to maybe mitigate some of these issues that we see across the development sector of brain drain. And then another question, which may or may not link to this, is from Jose Ramon Albert. A big issue is obviously focused on country ownership and how development organs, how have we been using more South-South capacity development, which seems to maybe increase more of this country ownership? Do we know enough about capacity development that involves some of these South-to-South initiatives? So I'll stop there if one has some input on either of these, and then maybe if we have more time, we'll come back to some of the other questions.
Well, very good. So we have who from the panelists wants? So we have the brain drain questions after an hour and South-South. Who wants to? Shaida, you want to start with one?
I'll try very quickly to a short answer to both of them. I think those are really important questions, important that needs to be discussed further, and those are very important comments for us to include in our future webinars. On the brain drain question, often we think of the technical skills being associated with brain drain. And I think that's tremendously important to keep in mind. But what I wanted to mention is that it's very important that we also invest in building leadership and program management and people management skills. And once we have better leaders in organizations, I think those leaders could really build an environment on a team and incentives for people to, to really stick around longer and reduce maybe brain drain. So leadership training is tremendously important. That's one point. The other thing I wanted to mention is using technology. I've noticed that it really is a very good way of, sometimes when you don't have enough technical expertise in the country, that using technology, you can actually acquire some of those skills from outside the country. So you should not be passive that you're losing, expertise. You should be much more active on seeing how, in a modern way, maybe as part of the CD 4.0, how can you bring more expertise into the team and the workplace. So think very positively rather than negatively, and also build leadership. On the country ownership and more South-South capacity building, capacity development, I think the regional development institutions have had a very big role in making this much more South-South capacity development. For example, African Development Bank and other development banks. So that has been really important to see. But I see a lot in different fields that much more South-South collaboration and capacity development. For example, I'm very much working in the open data space, where there is a lot of that going on, where African CSO units, where regional banks and others are really helping to help the countries. So this is something that's really developing, and there are lots of good examples that we could bring out. And thank you for that question. We need to bring out some of those good examples.
Any comments by Lisa on this point?
Just on the South-South point, I mean, I think we're seeing a number of donors start to try and integrate more South-South cooperation in some of their models of technical assistance. So DFAT in the Pacific, for instance, have started to try and recruit more technical assistance from the region, sort of recognizing that there are cultural affinities, there's sort of contextual awareness, there's sometimes less resistance to perhaps an Australian advisor going in. And I think that that's something that is going to be a growing area of work. It also sort of fits with these ideas of, good enough forms of governance that are appropriate to context. So we're not trying to get everybody to Denmark. We're trying to make incremental progress, and sometimes South-South cooperation, I think, can be more effective in facilitating that.
Can I maybe use the question of the staff turnover to ask you a related question, which you then can weave this in? Now there is a lot of talk about capacity development for SDG measuring and monitoring, and for many indicators we don't have the data in OECD countries as well as in developing countries. I think we all realize that capacity development is a decade effort. So it's not just we just say it's a week effort, or it's a few webinars and we have done the thing. So it will be taking some time. So there might just people saying, let's go for a shortcut. In particular, I'm now talking about SDG data measuring, and also with related to the staff turnover. Why should we waste so much time and energy on building capacity if we can just have it much simpler in data measurement? We can just, for instance, financing census. So we do a good census in the country to get the money, and we hire lots of people running the census, modern technology, and maybe a few surveys. All this conducted by private institutions and by CSO. So why, and modern technology. I happen to come across policymakers that we don't need anyway official statistics, because we have all the mobile phones. That's sometimes the perception. So basically, can we not just go away, let go of these old boring capacity development of old systems and do something new? Well, Barbara, what would be your take on that question?
That's actually a really interesting question. I think that there's no shortcut to developing a process. Basically, how do you accelerate the process? You can help it, but in the end, statistics, official statistics, are about a public good. So if we actually start, withdrawing from the state, withdrawing state functionalities, then we will not have this cohesion and this consensus that we need to have in order to develop capacities. That's why we were talking about actors and how they disagree and how they have to come into agreement. There's no shortcut for developing capacity. Also, nowadays we have this issue of we are all in this post-truth era, right? So we need at least one reference where we can all agree that this one is a good reference to think of the truth, to at least build a truth that we all can sort of believe in, and the National Statistical Office can help with this. They are actually an impartial institution whenever the environment helps, and whenever we are working on this statistical capacity development, they will be an institution that we can all trust, and that we can all put our trust to know what is happening. If we actually start letting each private institution, each one that has their own interest, then construct their own data, construct their own statistics, then we will never reach to this agreement. And this is the main issue in governance. We need to all agree and push together in a direction to develop our capacities for all of the other sectors, such as the ones that Lisa mentioned. So in this regard, it's true that there is a lot of staff turnover. This is a big issue. However, I think that one of the issues is because donors with these results-based frameworks, they tend to focus on quick outputs. So I train this many people, I can report this to my taxpayers, done. This is the end. However, if, as Shaida said, we can also focus on developing institutional knowledge rather than individual knowledge. So we can use more e-learning, we can also establish more procedures at the institutional level so that when there is replacement of individuals, the process can still move on and it doesn't depend so much on a single individual. And the last thing about individuals is that, as well as, again, Shaida mentioned, the leadership, the motivation for individuals to move on. And this is actually, I read a lot of Harvard Business Reviews because they actually focus a lot on management. And they say that motivated individuals, because autonomy, for example, and how much value you place in your work is not necessarily related to money. So sometimes the issue might be that these people working in the statistical office do not feel empowered enough. And therefore, we can also work on that without necessarily having to, I mean, of course, some wages have to increase. In some countries, there is a lot of issue of staff not being able to stay permanently and they're hired temporarily. But otherwise, at least feeling a bit more empowered could help with staff turnover.
Very good. I'm just realizing how time has passed by and we have slowly to come to the end of this first webinar series. I think we have managed to address a few questions, but we also have opened up quite a few new. I would be delighted to continue the conversation, in particular about the trust, the facts versus feelings, and the trust erosion and what this all means for capacity development. But I wanted to give all three panelists a chance, just in a very very short and concise way, to tell us the one takeaway and to make it easier for you. And maybe we start with Lisa in a minute. I mean, looking at this webinar now, in terms of what is your one main takeaway to make capacity development work in development or in data and statistics? We need what? To make capacity development work, we need, what is one of the key issues that you would like to take back home? So if you have a bag, you put it in your bag and you can take it home when you, in your life, Ottawa.
So for me, I think it goes back to the politics of our own development agencies and this push that we see increasingly for valuing easily quantifiable outputs that drive simplistic forms of capacity development, just as Barbara was saying, when we know that they're not necessarily the most strategic or most impactful. So, how do we change that in particular? And I wonder if there's a role here in particular for those working in data and statistics, because the rest of the aid community often thinks that it's data and statistics people that are pushing the quantifiable, measurable results indicators. So if you as a community are the ones who start saying that actually the world is more complicated, we need different forms of approach to measurement and so on, then perhaps we could start to sort of dislodge this unhelpful idea and open up the possibility of different approaches to capacity development.
Very good. Shaida, what is in your bag that you take? What do you put in the bag?
Put in the bag, if you want to if you want to label it, is better articulation of demand. And that basically means that capacity development can help us with identifying some of the needed shifts that we need to make in the capacity development going forward, and also this balancing between long-term capacity development and short-term needs of SDGs and other national demands and other international demands. How can countries actually help to articulate the demand that they have for building the skills they need, the leadership, and the institution? So articulating the demand for me is the one takeaway that we need to do more work on and pay attention to.
Very good. Last but not least, Barbara.
Yes,
what's your takeaway?
I would wish for more locally relevant solutions.
That's very clear. More locally relevant solutions. Very good. So I think it's 4 o'clock, and here in Paris, I really want to thank everybody. I was monitoring closely the attendance numbers, which has stayed above 100 all the time. It was increasing and increasing. So thanks to all of you who made time available on a Friday morning or afternoon, depending on which time zone you are. And I hope you liked the first webinar from us. Please give us feedback. If you go to our website, you will find an email. Any kind of feedback on the content, but also on technology, is most appreciated. It's a first time we do this. We are not experienced webinar people, but we really hope you like it and you will come back for a second webinar, which will be in December. And we will be sort of publicizing this when the time will come. And the second one will be on understanding and measuring data use. That will be also, it's one of the hot topics moving to data use, which I think will be as interesting as capacity development. The capacity development journey will go on. We will not stop. It's just the beginning. And please be in touch with us, and let's get the train going. So thank you so much. With this, we close this first webinar, and at this time, wishing you a very good afternoon, morning, and a happy weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.